Good evening, everyone. Before we start our council meeting tonight, this is something we do every year, which is honoring our police officer of the year for their exemplary service to the community, to the force, to the town of Normal. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief Rick Bleisner to give you a little information about our award-winning officer here tonight. So,
great. Thank you, Mayor. As the Mayor had mentioned, the Normal Police Officer of the Year Award provides recognition to individuals who have sustained performance during the course of the year. They've demonstrated exceptional customer service, and they support and are dedicated to the mission and the core values of the Normal Police Department. Officer Jonathan Cleveland was nominated because of his tireless work ethic, his work and response to and handling of multiple high priority calls during the course of the year, his work in specialty units, and his dedication to the field training program where he mentors young officers who are coming into the organization. John also works with the Special Olympics and dedicates his time to different programs with that, both on and off duty, and he's also involved with the COPS Ride, which is to honor fallen officers who lost their lives in the line of duty. So John is an outstanding representative of the town of Normal, and tonight it is my honor to present him with the Normal Police Department's 2019 Officer of the Year Award. John, congratulations.
I'm sorry?
Those are the corrected minutes from the budget work session. There was a typo. So.
Okay. Oh, that's right.
No, not quite. Almost there. Call to order a public hearing regarding the request for zoning code variances at 105, 107, and 111 West Locust Street. A matter involves a request for variances for parking spaces and building setback, and comes before the council on an appeal from the Zoning Board of Appeals from January 28th, 2020 decision. We'll start this hearing. We'll hear from staff with some background information to kind of give you up to date of why this is coming before us. After that, we will hear from the applicants if they wish to speak on behalf of the project. And we've had one request for testimony at the public hearing, and we'll do that. At such time as all that has happened, we'll adjourn the meeting. And I will say, unlike public hearings that we've done before, if you have questions for staff or the applicant, you're certainly welcome to do that. So, Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you for some background.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. As the mayor mentioned, there was a zoning board of appeals hearing on
Jason,
January
can you get on
28th.
the mic?
Sorry about that. On January 28th, the zoning board of appeals had a hearing regarding the variances requested here tonight. At that meeting, the zoning board did not approve those variances, although staff learned after the meeting that one of the members of the ZBA had voted in error. Nonetheless, the applicant appealed under our code that decision of the ZBA, and that is the reason it's before you here today. Your review of this is de novo, which means that you're not at all bound by the zoning board's decision or its justifications for it. And so the decision comes before you to hear it anew, essentially. And with that, I'll kick it over to Mercy to explain the...
Before you do, I did leave out one thing, council, that we will not take action during the public hearing. This comes under new business. Mercy?
Thanks. I don't know if we'll be able to bring up the aerial picture, just as a little visual. So as you have read in your report, this project pertains to 3 properties on West Locust. They're addressed as 105, 107, and 111. These 3 separate buildings have been around for decades and have been owned by the Iden family for several decades as well. The proposal before you is to approve variances that would permit the Idens to demolish all 3 and rebuild one structure that would be 5 stories. Parking would be provided at grade below the building. As proposed, this building would be 5 feet fewer away from the rear property line than required by code. This is permitting them to push the building back 5 feet off of the front property line to provide room for a circle drive. As noted in the report, the Circle Drive is intended for ride-hailing services such as Uber and Lyft, also delivery services such as Amazon or Grubhub. So many types of delivery services are out there. The other variance that is requested as part of this project is a parking variance. In the report, I actually walked you through 3 versions of the plan that were presented to the zoning board. The only one we're really looking at tonight, though, is Plan 2. And in Plan 2, the parking variance that they're asking for is 11 fewer spaces than code requires. This seems reasonable to staff. We, as you would have read, supported this before it went to the zoning board. We think this is a good opportunity to see how parking preferences are changing. We know nationally there are trends with fewer people in the college age group bringing cars to campuses, fewer miles being driven, driver's licenses being obtained later in life. So we don't exactly know how that is happening here, but this seems like a property where we could see how this trend is playing out. And the applicants certainly believe that this trend is applicable, which is why they've presented this project to you. A second reason why we support it is that we think just by its very design, people that want to live there would know going in that parking is not as readily available on this site as it might otherwise be. A couple of other reasons is, of course, by pushing this building back 5 feet, we're going to get a lot better landscaping up front, which is what the public sees. The extra 5 feet in the backyard really won't be that beneficial from a landscaping perspective. We also actually get more green space on this with this version of the plan than the other two. This is a project that, as you might have noticed on the renderings, is planned to be all masonry. It's a nice design. It should last a very long time, and given transportation choices being very much in flux, we think it would be good to build a building for the future that the applicants think will require less on-site parking. In the report, I also noted a technical issue that we don't really need to dive into deeply, but there is a stormwater issue in this neighborhood right now. The current sites provide no stormwater detention at all because when they were built decades ago, that wasn't a requirement. Anything new that gets built has to deal with stormwater. So if any project that gets built on this site will have to detain stormwater, so that should actually be helpful to the area. I think those are the main highlights in that project, unless Greg wants to add anything.
I think that captures it. Council questions for staff? Ms. Smith?
For the record, how many units are in the existing apartments and how many are planned for the new building?
Amongst the 3 existing buildings, there are 20 units. Okay, each of them are 2-bedroom units, so essentially there's a potential occupant load of 80 people. And then the proposed, I believe, is 37 units with 126 beds, so essentially 126 occupants.
Okay.
Further questions for staff?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
take me back to my zoning board of appeal days. So tell me a little bit more about the flooding and the stormwater and so forth of this area.
Sure.
And in particular, as you describe how it is now, how would other area properties benefit from whatever it is will be required now?
Sure, so this is definitely an engineering issue, and I'm not an engineer, so I'll give you the high-level view of this, and then if you need more, the town engineer is here. But right now, after extreme rain events, we do see some amount of flooding in the area, and apparently it's been going on for a while, although it was not brought to our attention until recently. By providing on-site detention, that will account for some of the extra water in significant rain events, but also flood routing would be designed into the project so that the water that's flowing over the surface would have a better way to go. That is my understanding of it, but I can certainly defer to Ryan if he wants to come up and correct me.
Well, as a follow-on to that, if I may, have there been some of the units that have gotten flooded, either in this or surrounding areas that, and
I guess I'll speak to that
Yeah.
just historically, having been with the town since the mid-'80s, and these were constructed in the early
okay.
'80s. Not on any kind of a chronic basis. And so it's not uncommon for our department to get phone calls from folks who live in what I'll call like garden units. So many of these buildings that were constructed in this vintage, the first floor is essentially half in and out of the ground. Not at all uncommon under certain conditions to take on water. And I don't mean, 3 or 4 feet deep, but essentially to have wet carpet, depending on the conditions, drainage issues. But from a historic perspective, it's not like these buildings are chronically have been an issue for years and years and years. I think Mr. Aldridge, as part of this entire contemplation of doing this study, some things came to light here in the last couple of years with some fairly intense rains. One was generated actually from the Lodge 2 development that was brought to our attention, and in some investigation in that, we actually determined that was actually a contractor's mistake during construction that was rectified after the fact. But that just brought to light the idea that should we investigate and looking at the storm sewers and that kind of thing in this area, because it's an older part of town. And again, a lot of the development, as Ms. Davison mentioned, occurred before we actually required stormwater detention to be collected and handled on site. So for example, if you look at this aerial and you see the building to the east or to the right of the red triangle, that's Covington Suites. Was built 6 or 7 years ago, and that's a good example of a new project. Tore down an old building, put back a new structure that was more intense, but essentially that's a building that has below-grade detention facilities to help manage their water on their site. So that's very typical of what will happen in this redevelopment should it occur. So,
okay, thank you.
Further questions for staff? Thank you. At this time, if the applicants would like to give testimony, please come forward. Could you state your names and addresses for the record, please?
My name is Russell Arbuckle. Address is 1906 Willow Bridge, Normal.
Thank you.
My name's Keith Iden. Address is 1424 Galloway Drive, Woodstock, Illinois.
Thank you. Would you raise your right hands? Is the testimony you give here today, do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You can go right ahead.
Well, as you can see, as Marcy pointed out, the red triangle, virtually right now, it's a sea of impervious surfaces. So anything that goes in there is, by new codes, has to have at least 20% green space. Currently, you're somewhere around 5 to 7% at most on those three sites. So in that regard, that's to address some of Kathleen's questions, Ms. Lawrence's questions, sorry. That the new buildings would be significantly more improved in that regard. But if I may go back a bit into how we got to where we're at. Typically with these apartment projects, we're tasked with creating a plan that comes up. We were asked first, how many parking spaces or how many beds can I get on the site? So through the course of our preliminary planning, we came up with a couple of different scenarios. And actually, the scenario that we settled on is actually not the most dense project that could fit on this site. By code, without any variances, we could build more beds, more parking, more cars, that sort of thing. But the Idens had a vision, and one of the parts of that vision was to have the Circle Drive and to have a place, a warm place that people could be dropped off out of the rain, out of the snow, out of the traffic, and when a delivery vehicle, whether it be food, whether it be groceries, whether it be packages from Amazon or whatever, they're not double parked on a relatively busy street. This gives them a way to get off of the street and not block traffic. So the other version that we came up with is essentially the third plan, or the second page of what you folks have, in that it has the required number of parking spaces for the number of beds that we have. So we can do that without any variances as a matter of right, but we do not get the Circle Drive. We're not able to push the building back, get the more green space in a place where it's conducive to the goals of what the owners have. So the difference between those two plans is somewhere between 135 to 137 beds and 103 cars. What we're proposing is 126 beds on a without any variances, 95 cars. And from that 95 cars is where we're asking for an 11 space variance. And the 5 foot, basically, we're not building a bigger footprint either. We're taking away from the front and pushing the building back. It's the same footprint of building. It's not a bigger building by getting the backyard variance. We're just taking the building and pushing it back, taking the space from the backyard and putting it in the front where everybody can see it. So, again, as we created those two plans, we went to staff with these and began talking with staff. And staff was concerned about the large decrease in parking and the larger variance that we had asked for. And the 11 space reduction was a bit of a compromise with staff that they felt that was a suitable plan that they could support versus the larger 20 spot variance. So to be very clear, the building we're proposing is no bigger and no more beds than what we can do as a matter of right. And I think that's been a misconception, that we're asking for more beds than we could normally get on a site. And I want to make sure that that's clear, that we're not asking for more beds. So the other much ado has been made about the stormwater issues. As we discussed, we're reducing from about a 93 to 95% hard surface between the building and the parking lot to about 77% of hard surface. So just in green space alone, and more water can saturate into the ground as opposed to being running off. On top of that, we add on-site stormwater detention, which is a requirement now. Currently, there's none, virtually none. There might be a little bit on the surface of the parking lots, but otherwise there's none. So in no way will the project that we're creating add more to the stormwater issue. If anything, it can only help it by creating less runoff and contributing less water than what is even currently being contributed to the problem. So that's a big thing in our mind. And I think that covers most of the points that I have. If you have others.
I wanted to come and meet all of you, and on behalf of my brother and my sister, to let you know a little bit more about us. My brother and I were both Illinois State graduates. We've owned properties down here for 30 years. One of my first jobs was working at the realty company, at Young America Realty, renting these apartments to the students. So I've always had an interest in the apartment rental side of that. That's how we ended up getting into the business of it. Andy Netzer has come to us in the last year or so and kind of complained to us that we need to put money into these buildings. We need new siding, we need new windows, and all this kind of stuff. New driveways, the asphalt's all cracked up. So we kind of came up with the plan. I said, I think now is the time that we make a decision to invest in the town of Normal, in Illinois State, and go along with building a new project. So, thank you.
Questions for these gentlemen? Mr. Nord?
First, I would like to thank you for investing in the town, because your project, it's going to generate more property tax than what the current older buildings generate. At least I assume it's going to generate more property tax. So,
Yes.
so thank you, because our community could use it.
Yes.
And with the off-street cul-de-sac or
Yeah.
turn?
Yeah, the turnaround.
Yeah, the
Yes.
turnaround. I lived in Chicago, and we didn't have one of those places. And when you get out in the street, you know, your cab is double parked, and it is dangerous. So I think that is a very good idea as well. I've got lots of friends that have kids that are going to college, and what I constantly hear is that instead of giving them a car, they give them an Uber allowance because the parents feel safer, you know, with their kids not having a car, because unfortunately, you know, kids will kind of get in trouble, you know, maybe do some drinking and then driving, or, you know, it's just safer. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Smith and then Ms. Lorenz.
So I understand that your existing structure has the current parking requirement of about 75% parking spaces to tenant. Is that an accurate statement?
I can't confirm that.
Do you have any sense of whether or not your tenants are parking cars on the street? Because some of the information was indicating that opposition is stating that if you're not providing the parking spaces in the building parking lot, it would be competing for space on Locust. Do you have any sense of whether or not your tenants are actually making use of Locust Street parking now?
I can't confirm that, but I think when those buildings were originally built, I don't even know if there was a code for parking at that time or not. The buildings are so old. I think possibly the ordinances come after that fact, so I would have to defer that question to like the management company that would maybe be able to answer that better.
There are 35 parking spaces that exist on site across these three buildings. So there's 20 units, 35 parking spaces.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a little under 50% spaces per, for the tenant base potentially, if that makes some sense.
But you don't really have any feedback to share as to whether or not your tenants are struggling to find parking spaces. An informal poll of my one graduate assistant says that in a shared apartment situation, they had a discussion about who got to have a car. So I was wondering if you were aware of any of those kinds of compromises your tenants were making.
No, I'm not aware of anything.
I think it would be very difficult to identify who's parking on the street, so, but the point's well made, question's well made. Ms. Lorenz?
Yeah, this is probably a question more for the property owner. Tell me what your thought is about the fact that you are increasing the number of beds in light of the fact that there is a general feeling that the market is saturated for apartment living. So tell me about why it is that you are increasing and what's your thought process from a business perspective of this investment?
Well, after putting numbers together on this, the way the land's valued out and everything, it just worked out to be more advantageous for us to add beds to the project rather than build this nice, huge, or not, like a 3-story building. It just, the numbers don't work out quite the same. So it seems to be the projects that have been going up around town have been similar, and that's kind of what we're trying to just follow that pattern of, you know, making a nice underground parking and then putting 4 stories above.
One of the things I might add to that as well, this is a R3B zoning, which is the highest density that we have on campus. So currently the buildings that are there aren't really living up to the master plan for the town to have the most dense apartments in those areas. So this is is bringing it closer to that master plan, if you will, of putting the population in those locations. And as staff had mentioned earlier, this seems like being in the heart of the campus is where it's at. This is the place where you would be without parking. So I can't speak necessarily to why, with the market economy or the marketplace, or what the economy is for that, but in a more of a micro analysis of it for this particular parcel, that's what makes the most sense.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Smith?
But as a follow-up to her comment, as property owners, if you didn't include the Circle Drive, you could actually have more units on this same footprint.
Yes, correct.
On the same parcel, yes, we could have more units. In this same footprint, it would be the same number of units.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we've had one person ask to give testimony to that, and that is Ms. Elizabeth Megley. Did I say that right? No. That's okay. You're going to correct me here in just a second when you identify yourself and your address, right?
My name is Elizabeth Megley.
Thank you.
My office address is 115 West Jefferson Street, Bloomington, Illinois. And I represent...
Can I ask you, could I swear you in, please?
Oh, absolutely, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
If you'd raise your right hand, and, well, would you, do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
This evening, I represent 4 different property owners that are adjacent to this project, as well as a property management company. And I think first and foremost, we'd like to indicate that we're not objecting to the project per se, but really the parking variance request. In fact, we aren't objecting to the variance with respect to the setback either, though we appreciate that the setback really only works with the parking variance. In this particular case, Locust Street already sees substantial on-street parking. Rarely are there available spaces. And this is even with adjacent property owners, newer projects that are compliant with the impact zone requirements. And our concern is that adding beds will exacerbate this problem. And that while we recognize national trends may be towards fewer students bringing cars to campus, I believe even at the zoning board hearing, there was mention of the fact that the U of I sees fewer students bringing cars to campus. We feel like Illinois State University is a bit different in that we don't have the high international student population that the U of I has, which may explain some of the lower numbers of cars being brought to campus. Additionally, the management company, which I represent, said based upon its own review of properties under management that are student apartments, it appears as though approximately 84% of students actually are bringing cars to campus. Certainly, we can't know with certainty how national trends will impact the local market, but as this is in the heart of campus, testing that theory at this juncture creates an additional burden that may not be seen in other areas if a new project was to go into one of those areas. Here, the burden on Locust Street would be significant. We are in favor of the idea of testing and seeing what the local market would bear on a long-term basis in terms of students' uses of Uber, Lyft, and other delivery services. But again, feel like this particular area of town is not a good test market for that. We remain concerned about the stormwater issues, though appreciate that staff and the developer appear to be working hard to resolve any stormwater detention issues that may exist. That does not change the fact that my clients are already feeling the impact of stormwater issues on that street and remain concerned about them going forward. I also happen to know and would just note for the record that Mr. Martin, Kaywin Martin, has included, I believe, a letter that's with your packets. He's in Florida, could not attend, but I know he voiced some similar concerns. This is really a parking issue. If this were a residential area, you'd likely see a lot more than just me appearing, because individuals in residential markets come out in force when they're concerns about parking issues and similar types of matters. Here, the individuals who are impacted the most are the students living in these apartments, and yet it's the apartment owners and management companies who really would be the individuals who would come out and voice their concerns about a project like this, or in this case, the variance being sought. Again, we appreciate the fact that the project can be done with full compliance with codes without any variances. With the risk to the parking and the impact on that particular area of town, if parking is made more challenging, we would suggest that a variance is not appropriate since the project could be conducted without that variance. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
At this point, again, we will take this up as new business in the council meeting. So at this point, I would ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
Please call the roll. You can pick your second.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Coos?
Aye. The public hearing is adjourned. Call to order a regular meeting for the Normal Town Council for February 17th, 2020. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos?
Here?
Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
Ms. Cummings?
Here.
Mr. Nord?
Here.
Ms. Smith?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Mr. Preston?
Here.
We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We've had two requests for public comment. Again, our public comment rules are items germane to the agenda and limiting your comments to 3 minutes. And our first commentor is Ron Ulmer.
Thank you for allowing me to address the council. Ron Ulmer, a resident of Normal. The town organization chart shows several departments report directly to the city manager and other departments report to the city manager through the assistant city manager. The assistant city manager reports include engineering, water, facilities management, and human resources. I am opposing the city manager's pay increase for several reasons, including the current salary is commensurate with other downstate municipalities However, all have at least 20,000 more residents than normal. After this increase, only Bloomington City Manager will earn more. The Peoria City Manager chose to forego his pay increases for the most two recent years. However, he plans to take the increase this year. Additionally, the relatively high town employee compensation benefits include the rapidly increasing public pension burden that the city manager and staff fail to address other than by increasing taxes cannot be sustained. This is true of all levels of government in Illinois. The rapidly growing total compensation of public employees are the main factor contributing to Illinois being one of the three highest tax burden states, 49th in real economic growth since the end of the Great Recession, and the highest percentage of people leaving the state. Although the Facebook page supporting moving the art wall received over 1,000 positive posts in a short amount of time, the town wasted resources in a failed attempt to govern against the citizens' will, thereby delaying the Trail East project and increasing the project cost, and the wall will be moved anyway. Failure to include a street-level pickup and drop-off area for Amtrak in Uptown Station, thereby dampening the increase in Amtrak ridership that would have occurred. A normal assumed the former pedestrian station grade crossing would remain open for the Uptown Station and trail use. However, Amtrak, Union Pacific Railroad, and the Illinois Commerce Commission had not allowed a new pedestrian crossing at grade level in many decades. Was anyone held accountable to verify for this incorrect assumption? While at least one high-level town administrator and the affected property owners were informed that the south track would be moved 7 feet further south during the high-speed rail project, either the administration failed to communicate this information to engineering or engineering dismissed the information. As a result, the new utility tunnels needed hundreds of thousands of dollars of corrective rework. Was anyone held accountable by the city manager or the assistant city manager at the time? No, the council was asked to approve the cost overruns, which they did, as they always do. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dave Shields.
Pardon me, I'm going through puberty, I apologize here. I'm Dave Shields, and I apologize for helpfully slamming the doors to cut out the noise from the outside earlier. I want to say a few words in praise of Pam Reese. According to the EDC 2019 Economic Profile for McLean County, the town of Normal is one of the 20 largest employers out of, I think, over 3,500 employers in the area, if I'm reading that right. It's been said that great cities don't just happen, they're made. I agree with that. And for almost 2 years now, Ms. Reese has been the Chief Operating Officer, caretaker, and champion of not just one of our largest employers, but also the best small city in the country. And she's been the model of how to do it right. In her first few months, she inherited one of the most austere budgets this town has had. Her oversight, management, and leadership saw the town through some uncomfortable but necessary choices without sacrificing high-quality services or safe and secure infrastructure. She and all of us should be proud of that. AAA bond rating. And simultaneously, she's been investing the necessary energy to forge strong and hopefully long-lasting relationships with economic interests, whether their reach is global or of the more local mom-and-pop variety. She nurtures the positive symbiotic relationships that already exist with other employers in town, notably Illinois State University and the city of Bloomington, and she is unfailingly, politely as available and responsive as these other demands allow, giving her full attention to whoever is in front of her at the time. She is the essence of integrity and professionalism. She's down to earth, not flashy. She's honest, open, kind, but woe unto you if you mistake that for being a pushover. My research hasn't been deep into this, but city administration does not appear to be a growth industry, and the research kind of indicates that maybe less than 15% of all city managers in the U.S. are female, which is somewhat beside the point, but telling. But what any of this means is that when city manager positions open anywhere in the country, existing managers with a demonstrated record of excellence are a highly sought-after commodity. We have one of the best in the country sitting right there. Whatever the town council can do to keep her there reasonably, please do that. Normal, present, and future will be the better for it. Thanks for your time.
We move to the omnibus agenda. Items considered routine in nature and will be handled with one vote unless council member would like to pull an item for discussion. Ms. Ms. Cummings?
I would like to be excused from any bills I've incurred.
Thank you. Mr. Nord?
Item A and B.
A and B? Thank you.
Yes.
Motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Items considered on the omnibus agenda tonight are a resolution to approve $405,750 of motor fuel tax funds for the Gregory Street culvert over Sugar Creek Rehabilitation Project. Please call the roll.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The item is approved. Item A is approval of the minutes of the budget work session special meeting January 16th, 2020, and approval of the minutes of the regular council meeting of February 3rd, 2020. Mr. Nord?
I so move.
Second.
Mr. Nord?
I would like the record to reflect that at that meeting, there was a discussion concerning the schedule of events that transpired before the budget was presented. The council priority setting and the Citizen Summit information was not provided to the staff before the preparation of the budget. And we had talked about changing that schedule next year. We didn't make a decision on that. I'd just like the record to reflect that that's something that's unresolved.
Further comment on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The item is approved. Item B is a report to receive and file town of Normal expenditures for payment as of February 12th, 2020.
I so move.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Nord?
Ms. Reese, we had a little bit of email correspondence regarding the mayor and council expense for the One Voice trip. Just for those that are less familiar with what that entails and what the purpose is, could you just kind of give a little summary?
Yes, I can, and Mayor Kus actually can complement my comments as well, because Mayor Kus has attended annually. I have not attended every year, but I've attended on a number of occasions. The One Voice trip, the expenses that are reflected in the report this evening include a few of us, a couple of council members and myself and Mr. Aldrich, to accompany the group that is put together through the Economic Development Council that makes an annual trip to Washington, D.C. It is a group of community leaders, community representatives, and we usually have up to 20? 30, up to 30 people representing various employers from the community. And we go out and we spend 2 days in Washington, D.C., meeting with our legislators, meeting with representatives of various federal agencies to talk about specific projects that are of interest and concern to the Economic Development Council. This year's trip, I believe the projects will be focusing on a capital investment project, a road project that the city of Bloomington has on the agenda. We have the Connect Transit Downtown Bloomington Transfer Center on the agenda as a major project, and one other project That is to discuss regional smart city initiatives with various federal agencies. So,
Rural broadband.
oh, and rural broadband, so 4 projects this year. So we do try to have 3 to 4 projects that we go out and discuss with our legislators. And I'm going to ask Mayor Coos what else he'd like to add.
I would add that it's a group that's well-received in Washington by our legislators and by people in various departments within the administration. We'll be talking with Department of Commerce, we'll be talking with Department of Transportation professionals. Some of this is fact-finding and some of it is actually advocating for a project. The 30 people represent government, they represent business, they represent education, they represent labor. It's a broad-based group of people, and it's called One Voice because we all stand behind the 4 projects that go forward. Those projects are vetted by the Economic Development Council for relevance and being worthwhile to go forward on.
And these One Voice trips have helped generate millions of dollars from the federal government in returning investment to McLean County.
I would say this building is a result of those trips that was advocated for. A significant sewer infrastructure project in the city of Lexington was a result of our One Voice efforts. So it's been worth our while to go out there.
Thank you. Another expense, the Uptown TIF, there's a reimbursement for nearly $243,000 for the CVS building. Could you just give a little bit of detail as to if that's an annual payment, and if that expense is reflected as a TIF-related expense?
Yes, sure. The expense Mr. Nord is referring to is on page 18 of the council report of the bills, page 18 of the expenses. That $243,000, almost $244,000, is an annual payment to the developer of the CVS building in Uptown Normal, and that is a TIF expense because it is a rebate back to the developer for the TIF increment, basically the increased value of the property over the base. And since you and I spoke right before the council meeting, I was able to get a little further information. That part of our TIF, or of our development agreement with the developer has only 2 remaining years left for payment. So this is an annual expense, but only for 10 years, and this is year 8.
Okay, so then going forward, then after 2 more years, that money will remain with the town, right?
Well, it will stay in the TIF until that portion of the TIF, until we're treating that portion of the TIF as if it expires, and then it goes to all the taxing bodies, their appropriate share.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Further on the bills? Please call the roll.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Mayor Coos?
Aye. The motion is approved, or the bills are approved, I'm sorry. Resolution under general orders, number 7, a resolution to award the bid for the water treatment plant recarbonation basin number 1 coating project to RP Coatings at a total cost of $74.
C. We missed item C.
See,
Oh, I'm sorry. I checked it off by mistake.
Premature.
You already told me what you wanted, so I thought, no. Item C is a resolution to appropriate $379,100 of motor fuel tax funds for the Towanda Avenue Bridge over Sugar Creek repair project. Ms. Smith.
I move this item.
Second.
Ms. Smith?
I had been in correspondence with Ms. Reese in advance of the meeting, and I do understand that both item C and item D on the omnibus agenda are a formality because these are motor fuel tax projects. But I wanted to get some clarification because the Towanda project is near and dear to my neighborhood. So both of these projects, what budget year are these projects coming out of?
Well, I'll invite City Engineer Mr. Otto to come forward and answer your questions. In the meantime, I will say that the Towanda Avenue project is both current fiscal year and next fiscal year.
So the dollars for this, some of it is from the current fiscal year and some will be coming from the next fiscal year
Correct.
allocations?
Correct.
Okay. With these two expenditures, on a percentage basis, how much of motor fuel tax dollars remain in the current fiscal year allocation that are available to us?
Defer to Mr. Otto.
Approximately 95%. That number could vary as we go through the spring. We're going to be bidding a couple different projects, one of which is the Glen Avenue Bridge project next month. And depending on how those bids come in, we may or may not need to obligate that additional 5% of those funds. But any funding that is left over at the end of the fiscal year, March 31st, we would roll over into the next fiscal year, and it would be available for projects in the following fiscal year.
Is there any danger of forfeiting the use of those dollars if we don't make an allocation in the current fiscal year?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And as we're looking at this project, the improvements to Towanda Avenue south of the Vernon Avenue intersection were widened to add that turn lane, which was very much appreciated. Are there any plans to make improvements to the intersection north of Vernon Avenue?
Right, yeah. At this point, no. The bridge, the improvements you referred to were done by the city of Bloomington 2 years ago. That was actually one of my projects when I was with the city of Bloomington. So the city added the northbound right turn lane because of the very heavy movement for the right northbound movement there. We plan to take a cursory look at the traffic as part of this project, but in a sense, this is mostly a maintenance project. It is re-waterproofing the bridge, putting a new wearing surface. We have a significant amount of scour underneath the north abutment that we need to address, along with some storm sewer damage that's resulted from the scour. So we'll be doing that, as well as repairing the sidewalks on both sides that are seeing some significant salt deterioration and snowplow damage.
As you're looking at the sidewalk on the western side of Towanda Avenue is only as wide as a pedestrian, but there is an access ramp to the bike trail that comes up at that intersection. And to get to the shops at College Hill, a bike is either forced to go into the street or is competing on that narrow sidewalk. Is there any consideration given to possibly widening the sidewalk on the western side of Towanda Avenue so that bikes could share it as they do when the sidewalk and the Constitution Trail intersect on sidewalk before it joins the trail and runs parallel to Vernon Avenue?
Just to clarify, are you talking about widening the sidewalk that's on the bridge now on the west
Yes.
side? We're not considering that just because it would be a significantly larger project than the maintenance we're proposing at this time. So it would be a bridge widening project, which would be a significant change from the scope we're proposing.
No, this would be the sidewalk simply going to the curb instead of is there any grass between the sidewalk and the street, or does the sidewalk come up straight to the curb?
I don't recall the configuration right now, I'm sorry, but we can take a look at that.
If you wouldn't mind taking a look at
See
that.
if there's a potential to widen the sidewalk up to the bridge, but just at this time, there's no plans to widen the actual bridge.
Okay, so you're keeping the same footprint?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, the one thing I will add, though, you had made a comment about the additional pavement, just a couple of small sections of concrete that were added right adjacent to Vernon Avenue, and we are using that for access to the trail during the trail resurfacing and for some of the horticulture work that was done in that area this past summer. So once the trail resurfacing is done this spring and the horticulture work is done, we will take that section of concrete out because we don't want people to think that it's a way to drive up to the curb and then just get dumped right out into Vernon.
It did cross my mind.
Right, so.
As long as you don't hurt the Charlie Brown Christmas tree that is right
Yes.
there. So, that's all the questions I had.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Ms. Cummings.
Aye.
Mr. Nord.
Aye.
Ms. Smith.
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. The resolution is approved. Now we'll go to general orders. Item 7 is a resolution to award the bid for the water treatment plant recarbonation basin. You all wanted to hear me say that twice, didn't you? Basin number 1 coating project to RP Coatings Incorporated at a total cost of $74,000 and authorizing an associated budget adjustment.
Move approval.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Questions on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Cruz?
Aye. Resolution is approved. Item 8 is a resolution waiving the formal bidding process and authorizing a contract with Henson Disposal for Bloomington, Illinois, for processing of recyclable residential construction, demolition, and bulky waste collected by the town of Normal at a rate of $54.65 per ton.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Questions on this item? Ms. Smith?
Ms. Reese and I exchanged some emails on this, and I was wanting to get some clarification on the types of recycling, because it read to me initially as it was only construction waste, but it is the bulky household waste and recycling. But I was pleasantly surprised by the amount of recycling that is accomplished through this service, and how much they actually are keeping out of the landfill. Given that, I was wondering if you could provide some information to residents about how they can add recycling to their existing garbage collection. Because as I walk my dog on garbage day, I'm not seeing a lot of yellow lids. And I'm not sure that people are aware that they can have a second can just for recyclables and how much that adds to their cost of collection.
Just to be clear on that, the recycled material that goes into the yellow lidded bins is not what we're talking about here tonight.
It isn't?
No. This is construction materials and what's called bulky waste,
So-
the
so this is-
refrigerators,
This is the collection that is going to the curb that Normal still gets to do every week.
Right.
And Bloomington has to wait once a month.
you got it.
Okay. But as a side.
Point taken, point taken. Further on this item?
Well, I will answer Ms. Smith's question,
Sure.
if that's okay. And actually, we can, citizens can call Public Works and request another can or a recycled can. If they have an interest, I think there's a fee associated with that can, but that is available to them, and we do deliver for just the regular household recycling.
Does it increase their monthly garbage bill?
No.
Good to know. Thank you.
Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Cruz?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item 9 is an ordinance rezoning property in the town of Normal having to do with the property at 3495 East Rab Road.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Discussion on this item. Please call the roll. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. You know, I was just wondering, what is going to become of the property, and is there, I remember back, I guess where I'm coming from on this is I remember back many years ago, the 2011, 2012 timeframe, this Healing Stone Court was a hot area for rezoning. How has that gone forward? And, you know, how do the surrounding property owners feel about this latest installment of development?
Staff just discussed that this morning, kind of the history of this. There are only a couple of parcels left, I think, that haven't been developed. I'm looking at Ms. Davison.
Three.
Three
That's what I
parcels. She holds
thought.
up three fingers. You can come up, Mercy. 3 parcels that have not yet been developed. Initially, there was significant public feedback,
remember that.
neighborhood feedback.
Yeah.
But there has been little response since the developments, the apartment units have developed
So they've been
as planned.
successful. That's what I was wondering. I mean, they've been successful
Yeah.
and symbiotic with one another and the other adjacent.
Yeah, I've not heard any complaints. The two initial rezonings on Healingstone Court were on the west side of Healingstone, so they were adjacent to the backyards of residential development that was already there. And so
Okay.
those, I think, a significant number of people that were concerned were very close. After the Healingstone, the first Healingstone PUD was built, I didn't hear anything about it. I think by the time the second one was built, adjacent to it, I don't think there was any real public input at that point. And so now the property we're looking at is on the other side of the street, on the other side of Healingstone, just being rezoned. We do anticipate a proposal for some sort of multifamily PUD to come through the process here in the next month or so. So you'll be seeing that as well.
Okay. Okay. Because I see a for sale or a sold sign.
Right.
on
So
that
this will leave, there were 5 properties, or there might have been 6 to start with, but they've been re-subdivided. So now there are 5 lots on Healingstone. The 2 on the west side have been rezoned and developed as R3A multifamily. On the east side, presuming you approve this, there will be 2 lots that are zoned R3A, and those will be redeveloped as multifamily, and that will leave 1 lot that's still zoned B1 general business.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's in, if you look at the notes from the planning commission, there was really no one speaking.
I
One
was,
point or
I was
one way
surprised.
or
I
another.
remember Healingstone Court being a hot topic. The old
Exactly.
Planning Commission days. Thank you.
Further on the item? Please call the roll.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Item 10 is a resolution authorizing an increase in base pay for the city manager for fiscal year 2019-2020.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on this item? Mr. Nord?
This performance evaluation took place before I was on the town council. It was in April, and I was not a part of that discussion, so I really don't know the specifics that were talked about as to how a raise would come about and why the decision wasn't made then. So absent all of that information, a majority of the council was involved in those conversations. I just don't feel comfortable voting on something that I don't have the history on. So I'm going to abstain from voting on this issue.
Thank you. Ms. Smith?
I just want to speak out publicly to endorse this raise for Ms. Reese. There have been some comments about certain situations that the writers have expressed that, in their opinion, they come under the purview of Ms. Reese, and she should have taken different action that, in their opinion, was more appropriate. As I read some of these comments, I'm questioning whether or not she has within her job description to act against policy that is set by this council, which requires a 4-vote majority to move forward. So if we separate out policy implementation that may not be consistent with what everyone favors for the town of Normal and operational effectiveness in how she carries out her duties, in agreement with Mr. Shields, I feel that she has been nothing but professional. I know that she makes herself available around the time of the council meetings, over the weekends, on holidays. I've gone to meetings where I've wanted to be in attendance there, and oftentimes she is the town person there. The job of city manager is not a 9-to-5 job, and it is someone who becomes the face of the town of Normal. And in doing so, she oftentimes becomes a lightning rod to attract negative opinion and not so frequently praise for the job she's doing. In some classes I've taught at Illinois State, one of the things we look at is compensation. And for my freshman students, I get them to look at executive compensation, which for a publicly traded company is readily available on the website for the Securities and Exchange Commission under the DEF 14A proxy filings. If you look there, you will see that CEOs are paid many multiples of the wages paid to rank and file employees of the very companies that they head. I can assure you that Ms. Reese is not paid many multiples of the average income here in the town of Normal. And that because of her experience, she has an institutional history that is beneficial to this community, and her professionalism is something that she carries on a constant basis, and I feel that she is well deserving of this 3% raise.
Thank you. Ms. Cummings and then Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you. And I won't belabor too long because I feel like Councilwoman Smith has certainly covered many of the things I would have liked to have covered. I certainly want to share one that even looking at her salary currently is not far off from average salary, whether we look locally or even if we look at a more national average based off of the myriad of things that they put together, which is budget, number of FTEs, as well as number of citizens in a community. So we would not be far off base. I also want to bring up the perspective of if many of us who are known to have a 9-to-5 job were ever told we would not get our bonuses or raises, I think we would have a lot to say, especially when we've worked hard, put in the effort, have met and exceeded expectations. We would look for that particular reward. From my own experience in being able to have a city manager who is knowledgeable, who is readily available, I can speak highly to that experience, no matter whether I've called her at midnight with issues and she's picked up the phone and has responded, or whether I've sent questions. I've sent emails where there can be 10 questions in there and I'll get a response to all 10 questions, or whether I ask for information to be a resource and how to whether it's to move forward on a particular thing that I'm working on or to be of help with. She's always been that resource and does not have to be, because that's not always the direct request from her job, but it's very beneficial. And so I think going above and beyond, like I said before, if we were in, a regular for-profit company, you would want to have a pay as well as a raise commensurate of going above and beyond the call of duty. And so for that, I do support.
Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you. I won't belabor the point either, building off of both Ms. Smith and Councilwoman Cummings. It's easy from the outside to look at a position like this as very public and have something to say depending on how the issues are being voted up here based on our job. So I think it was very well stated that many of the things that we've heard about are really subject to council approval and not city manager action. So I just want to remind everybody that any city manager focuses on and works on the things that they are directed to by their city councils, and that's us. And so those items are most of them that I've seen are really not subject to
to her job description in this specific case. But from the inside, I also want to remind you that something I believe Mr. Shields touched upon is that City Manager Reese, for better or worse, inherited a very large budget cut, and the reduction of 25 FTEs, full-time equivalent positions, to the town of Normal shortly before taking over this position. And I believe about 40% of that employment reduction was in city administration, her department, her area, people that she could rely on to do the oversight work of keeping the town humming along and not just surviving, but thriving. And I think she's done an amazing job of that. From the inside, we see that. We've heard from some of our department heads through some of the reports, some of the items that have been on our agendas, some of our budgeting process, that things are a bit more austere in the town of Normal because of those budget cuts. But from a citizen's perspective, the services and the operations of Normal have, for the most part, gone on with very little notice and very little blip in because of a result of that staff and that budget cuts. So kudos for somehow figuring out how 6 people can do the job of 10. Also, I do want to remind everybody that this is the 2018-2019 period of time that we're talking about. Some of the items raised were more contemporary, so not really relevant to the evaluation that we're talking about this evening. But I also want to remind everybody that during that period of time, a significant amount of work was done by Ms. Reese and staff on a comprehensive plan, on Rivian relationships, and also grant work that resulted in bringing $13 million of taxpayers' dollars back to our community. That was under the helm of Ms. Reese and the city manager during that period of time. So a significant amount of production done that we see in the background that may not be as visible out there happened during that period of time.
You?
I'm supportive.
Ms. Lorenz?
Yes, I am obviously very supportive of Ms. Reese and this particular item. But I want to raise a couple of points of concern that I sense here. You know, in the 5 years that I have been part of this body, and I guess it's nearly been 5 years, and there have been raises for a previous city manager who was a man, and I don't think this was ever questioned. And as a female sitting up here, I just feel like it is, for all women, important that I raise this issue up. I'm not making any accusations that anybody is thinking that because she's a woman, she doesn't deserve a fair wage. But we all know that that number is still 84 cents on a dollar. And I want us to make sure that we examine our hearts and our minds on this one. She is doing the job of an excellent city manager, regardless of her gender. But I want to make that point. And then another point that I would like to say is that I'm disappointed in my colleague, Mr. Nord, for choosing to abstain. I think you've been on this job for almost a year now, and you certainly have had a lot of interaction with Ms. Reese. I might even hazard to guess more than many of us. And while you were not perhaps part of the discussions surrounding the evaluation, I think you're astute enough to know whether or not she's been doing her job well. And I just wonder what you are afraid of tonight in casting a vote.
I'd like to respond to that.
I think that's a fair question. I'm going to let Mr. Scott Preston speak, and then I'll come to you.
And Mayor, I'm happy to defer so I'm not stuck in the middle of a conversation that I'm not going to partake in.
Mr. Nord.
Sure. Just for the record, I abstained in our executive meeting from voting as well. So this was a decision that was made long ago.
Thank you. Mr. Preston.
Thank you. There were a number of points up here that I would certainly echo, and Mr. McCarthy hit on a couple that specifically rang true to me. And so for the sake of not repeating those, I will bring up just one more in support of City Manager Reese. As we're having this conversation, I'm thinking back to 2 years ago and the many number of months, actually almost a year, when a lot of us around here went through the search process for a new city manager and went through a broad search across the region and across the country. And, one of the sticking points for me now that came out of that process was that, internal or not, Pam rose to the top of that pool of candidates from the start. And it was all the better that she was already here at the town, had built her career here, had the institutional knowledge and the relationships. But I think back to the candidates who originally applied when the position became open, and the kind of things that they were doing and the kind of things that they were suggesting made them qualified to be the city manager in Normal, and compare that with what Pam had done then, and thinking now all the more that she has accomplished on behalf of this great town since. And I'm very proud of the work that she's done, and I think that this is far and away deserved, and probably about the least we could do.
Thank you. Ms. Reese, how long have you been employed by the city, the town?
I was hired in July of 1991, so this July will be 29 years.
And so, I think you came as an assistant to the city manager when you first came. I have, as a volunteer for various boards and commissions, and as council member and mayor for 19 years, have seen that the town of Normal is an exemplary organization with a strong culture, a very strong culture, and of professionalism that is unmatched, in my opinion. And Ms. Reese has risen to the top of that organization and become our city manager. I will echo what Mr. Preston said about the search process, but I'll throw a little extra information in there, in that the search firm that we use said it's going to be hard to get people to apply for this job because they assumed that Ms. Reese was a candidate. And they didn't do that on the assumption that we were going to make an internal hire regardless, and we're just going through the motions. But it was because Ms. Reese has the respect of her peers, the high respect of her peers. And as part of that discussion with the search firm, they said, if you choose not to hire Ms. Reese as city manager, we can certainly place her in another community very quickly. She will be in demand. And so it really made our decision quite a bit easier, and it has been verified by the work she's done over these past 2 years as city manager. So, of course, I'm completely in support of this increase in base pay. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lawrence?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. We have one item of new business tonight, and that is a resolution approving zoning code variances for 105 to 111 West Locust Street.
Move approval.
Thank you. Second.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on this item. Ms. Smith?
After listening to the parties making their comments at the hearing, I'm left with the reality that as property owners, these individuals had the right to build a larger facility with more units in them and meet the parking zoning limitations in doing so, but detract from the design of the facility by eliminating the circle drive and the setback, which gives us more green space that is in view to the public, as well as something more readily enjoyed by the tenants. I can appreciate concern about occupancy rates being impacted by this decision, and I can appreciate the concern that this location is not something that the opposition would like to see as a test case for lowered parking, but this is a building that would last conceivably, under accounting depreciation schedules, 39 years, but for use, probably 50 years or more. Just the other day, reading in the Panagraph, the property was purchased to locate the post office on Empire Avenue, and that building is still there and is once again being used. So we're looking at a 50-year time horizon. I live in a neighborhood that has one-car garage houses, many of them. At the time those were built, no one conceived of having a car, 2 cars in a household. I think we need to recognize the fact that trends are changing and that it is conceivable that students won't necessarily be as dependent upon the car as our generation has been, and that if any place is ripe for a test of higher density with less parking and more reliance on walking and public transit, this is a prime location, and the trade-off of this design with that circle drive and that green space, I think, would be an asset to the town.
I'm going to weigh in with a little history here on this, this issue and offer some of my own opinions on it as well. I'm in support of this project going forward for multiple reasons. One, as the owners of the current property themselves pointed out, the properties in that block are getting a little long in the tooth, with the exception of one property that is newer there. And they are faced with some challenges in terms of, and they have found out that the cost benefit to rehab those properties just wasn't there. And so they're trying to continue to keep themselves whole in a piece of real estate that they own. They have asked for some variances on it, and the parking variance, I think, is the one that is rising to the top. But it is my opinion that they're investing personal dollars at a significant amount, and they are at risk if this doesn't work. The town is not at risk if this doesn't work. They're the ones that'll be at risk if they can't rent those apartments because they don't have enough parking. I don't think that will be the case. I'm going to reference back to the parking impact zone, which has been an issue, and it's something that I've come to dislike over the years. I was probably in my second meeting as a council member when that was done, and the parking impact zone was created to demand 1 parking place per bed for an apartment. And that decision didn't come necessarily as a recommendation from the task force who studied this. That decision was made quickly at the council table. It was suggested by a council member, there was brief discussion on it, and it was added to the parking impact zone study and approved. And over the years, in some of my conversations with some of the larger property owners, informal conversations, I will say, they tell me that in a 4-bedroom apartment unit in their properties, they would think that the overall parking use is about 3.5 cars or 3.75 cars per apartment. So people were not always bringing cars to the university or to live in these apartments. So as part of that, I'm going to ask staff to start a process to take a look at the one parking place per bed and bring that back to us with some recommendations going forward. I think now's the time to do this. I think we're going to see more of this kind of issue coming forward to us. I think somebody referenced that this might be a good test case to try this out. But in general, I am supportive because I don't believe it will be a significant impact in the parking, and I do believe that it's the developer at risk, and we should let them do what they want in this case. Mr. McCarthy.
You stole my lines, Mayor. I'll keep it brief because many have covered, between Ms. Smith and the mayor, have covered most of what I was going to say anyway. I'm supportive. I'm going to refer back to our comprehensive plan, which talks about greater density, reducing space for parking and the like. And so I think that this is certainly, we adopted a comprehensive plan which urged us to move in that direction. This may be early in a process, but I think it's the right place where it's not mixed in with residential. It's more set back. Just on a personal note, I lived across the street from your property in college shortly after it was built. I may or may not have been at a party at one of your properties. I can either confirm or deny. Without giving away my age, I imagine that they are as...
I think you just did.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I just gave away my age, that they're long in the tooth and probably as gray as I am by now. But on a more serious note, I appreciate that although you could build a bigger project and probably would generate greater revenue, you were looking for a best project for the area, and I greatly appreciate you looking at that from that perspective for our community. The comprehensive plan also talks about infill projects as something that the town should be supporting rather than sprawl, because as we know, the greatest cost to a community is infrastructure growing out, and you're attempting to recycle infrastructure that keeps our student housing stock attractive and interesting for students and a greater variety of it. So I appreciate you guys bringing that aspect to our community. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Ms. Cummings, and then Mr. Nord.
I won't be for you long, but I found it, I just have to commend you on the design. I feel like a lot of times this community sticks to what it knows. And in this design, it really shows the wave of where we're going, where you were intentional about, pickups for Amazon, Grubhub. These things are realities of what's changing. Whether or not the whole parking and car thing, there's a lot of conversation. We do know, and we have seen across the country trends of car usage going down. We can't necessarily say for certain what's happening here. We can't say that even having more parking space will reduce any issues of parking, because not only do you have to account for the residents, you have to account for their guests as well. So that's a whole nother issue of its own. But the realities of things that I think of would be, that the aesthetics. What does it look like? Is it appealing? Does when someone passes it, will they be attracted to it? Green space. We talk about coming back into a space of having more green space in our areas, and so I thank you for thinking of those things. And much like my colleague, Councilmember McCarthy has stated, you could have went for something maybe not as aesthetic. Taking away some of that green space, adding more beds, but you really were thoughtful in that design and how much it could fit into what we are envisioning for our community, and I commend you for that. Thank you.
Mr. Nord.
Mr. Mayor, those were fantastic comments, and for the paper, I fully agree with everything the mayor said about that, which
Thank you.
is very good. Anyway, something that came to mind whenever you were talking. I remember whenever Rivian came to town, and they were talking at an EDC event, and they were talking about their vision of car ownership, how people aren't going to be owning cars. These cars are just going to come around and pick people up, and ownership is going to change. So with their vision in mind, your project kind of fits that story. So I think it's fantastic, and I would hope that somebody puts this bug in their ear, because it would be great to see if your building, kind of follows that vision, how that could kind of incorporate into this Rivian story that's being written in our community. So I'm excited to see the future.
Thank you. Mr. Preston.
Thanks, Mayor. I am also supportive of this plan overall, and thank you to the Iden family for investing in Normal, and investing here in this community, and investing in the future ISU students, I guess, for generations to come, who will fill those beds every year, I'm sure. Yeah. One question that it's more just probably a clarification on the statement as it's written itself, potentially a question on kind of the substance. So I'm looking at the zoning board meeting from the 28th of January, the minutes from that discussing this issue, and it's talking about parking, and at one point it says that a member of the owner's design team said they can draw parking spaces on a plan, but you may not be able to park in them. It's difficult parking under a building. Is that in reference, is that, how do I word this? Is that an area of concern for staff with this specific proposal that we are dealing with tonight? That there may be parking spaces, but they may not be as usable or accessible? And that would be on page 2. In the largest paragraph, right in the middle.
All right, I didn't see that in the minutes, so I appreciate you looking through that. I'll defer to Mr. Trummel in terms of the comments that occurred at the zoning board, and then basically current practice.
A great question, and that is as the mayor indicated, the impact zone was established in 2001, and the idea was to get as many cars on private property and off the streets as possible. And so that did come with some drawbacks in regard to parking space widths, the introduction of stack parking where you can stack people behind each other. Surface parking, open surface parking, it's less of a problem, but as soon as you start to neck down a space to 8 feet and then also put it under a building where you're adjacent to walls and columns, it gets more difficult. I have to say though, in all the time that it's been on the books, and I'm not going to say that folks like Andy Netzer or First Sight or Sammy don't get the phone calls from the parents, but I will say I'm surprised historically how few times. In fact, I've never been contacted by a parent saying, "What on earth were you thinking about this stacked parking thing?" They find a way to get in them, and so it works, but it is difficult. And I think the plan that you considered and approved tonight moves away from the 8-foot spaces and goes to the 9s. It does make it easier to negotiate under the building. There's no question about that.
Good, thanks.
Ms. Lorenz?
Well, yeah, I this has kind of been a night of memory lane because I think I was either on Planning Commission or Zoning Board when Noodles came through. And I remember there was a parking variance there, and it was like, oh, people aren't going to drive to Noodles on Main Street. But they do. And every time I go to Noodles with friends of mine, they remind me of my vote that allowed that variance. And that's probably been 10 years ago, maybe,
Probably
Noodles?
15, yeah.
15? Okay, well, thanks, Greg. Mr. Trump. Anyway, so I have some trepidation about the parking variance for the Noodles reason. But we are obviously 15 years down the timeline, so maybe we're getting closer to when that might really be a reality. So I'm cautious about that. I'm kind of struck by the fact that, like in the letter that the attorney referenced from one of
Mr. Martin.
Yeah, Mr. Martin. It says the solution to this concern should be reduced bed count, not parking code. But that sort of stands in stark opposition to the very zoning code that it is. So I don't know that we can really do that without being at odds with our zoning code. And I don't know that we really want to change the zoning code there because it is in the center part of campus, and it does stand to reason to try to cluster the student population nearest to campus so they can walk places. I think we've tried going, other places, and that has some of its own challenges. So I tend to probably fall on the side of the zoning code as it is, to be the densest and to take advantage of that without exceeding or even pushing it to the envelope, as Mr. Arbuckle mentioned. But I would just want to point that out to at least this person, is that, if the concern is number of beds, I mean, you have to look at how it's zoned. And if the concern is maybe the overall market, I mean, that's a bigger issue, you know, and I guess, you know, the free market will decide how that all plays out. And so, you know, I am concerned about the saturation. You know, that begins to get into another issue about the new housing development that will be going up on campus as part of residential housing. So I think what helps me on this, to be honest, Mayor, is your statement to look at the parking impact zone, because I think that that may help other property owners and management companies to be able to not feel so confined by that requirement. So I think that's a step in the right direction. So rather than tackling zoning code, I think the parking impact zone is probably better off. Thank you.
Ms. Smith?
I work for the university, and I'm not speaking as a representative of the university, but to address the attorney's one assertion that Champaign-Urbana campus has more international students who don't typically acquire a car while they're going to campus. The ISU is pursuing a larger percentage of international students with their new INTO program. And so those students are going to become a larger percentage of our population than they have been. And also, the university did recently approve the addition of an engineering program on campus, which will hopefully attract more students. So my sense is there is more concern about the competition coming from the new dorm going up for sophomores on campus than just competing with other landlords. But I don't know how well known it is in the community to recognize that Illinois State University is continually trying to maintain their student enrollment at its current level, and that the potential exists for a different makeup of student body with the addition of this engineering program and this INTO program that could add to demands that we have not seen in the past.
Thank you.
I could just add one
Ms.
comment. We have, in regard to the parking impact zone that is on our list of things to look at this year, we have in recent years made some tweaks to it, but certainly with the change of mobility and expectations, we will look at that on a more comprehensive level this year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Ms. Cummings.
Aye.
Mr. Nord.
Aye.
Ms. Smith.
Aye.
Mayor Coos.
Aye. The resolution is approved. That concludes our business here tonight. Before taking a motion for adjournment, are there comments or concerns, Mr. Nord?
I just want to point out that this last vote we had, it seems like we all kind of came together. And for me, that felt really good. I hope in the future we can come together on other things that kind of unite us, because we don't have a good history of that. And I just want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your comments, because that kind of, I don't know, united us. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion, Mr. McCarthy.
Yeah. Not a concern, just a comment. 2 meetings in a row. I'm going to plug Rivian Automotive. A recent story looking at the long-term plan of Rivian and their investment in our community looks to be somewhere near $750 million, $750 million investment in the town of Normal plant and facilities. Again, I'm going to say to those that have had reservations and concerns about that is hopefully this is comforting when we start to hear their long-range plans of what they're thinking about. They've been a very quiet company. They've got a long road yet to go to push a car out the door into the marketplace, but being able to see their plans of $750 million to invest in our community, hopefully all of us can start to feel more at ease and get behind supporting them. I think it's an amazing turn of events from a few years ago, near knocking the darn thing down, to celebrating that companies here and going to spend that kind of money and bring that kind of jobs here. We're talking hundreds or over 1,000 jobs being brought back to our community. This is a rare occurrence in cities, particularly around manufacturing facilities like an auto plant. This is extraordinarily rare. I mean, this is one in more than a million occurrences. And so we are amazingly fortunate, and I just want to, every opportunity when they tell us how much more they're going to do in our community, is give them a shout out and support them as much as I can.
I'll just add to that, Mr. McCarthy, in the sense that speaking last week with a very senior member of the organization, not Mr. Scaringe, that he reminded us that when 3-4 years ago when we were discussing the plant and what they were going to do with it, they said it's a 2.5 million square foot plant. We'll never use all of that space. And we've got to figure out what to do with this extra space. And this year they're putting an addition on that plant. So it kind of, they said, things have come together like we've never expected on this project. And I think it bodes well for normal Bloomington, McLean County. It's going to be a major economic driver in our community going forward.
Absolutely.
Mr. Preston.
Yep, thanks. I am reminded, switching gears a little bit from Rivian, reminded every time it snows, like it did last week, Thursday, just how great our public works and all the individuals out there cleaning the streets and allowing us to go about our lives as though Mother Nature didn't even occur. How great you all are, so thank you. Shout out, of course, to staff for another great job taking care of people normal on our roads.
Great. Ooh. Leg cramp. Ms. Smith.
We will only have one more council meeting before this opens up, but there is a notice that the community garden registration and renewals will be opening up on Tuesday, March 10th for normal residents, and non-residents have to wait 2 days. So if this cold weather is getting to you, get out those seed catalogs and start planning, and make sure you put it on your calendar to get registered for the community gardens if that's the best way you have to play in the dirt.
Thank you. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lawrence?
Aye.
And Mayor Kus?
Aye, we are adjourned. Thank you.
I'm Joe Deacon. Hey, DGLT here. Hey, Joe.
Value in odd numbers, right?
Yeah, that helps. Well, I'm thinking about it.